Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Ask an Atheist. Now, those of you who watched last week will know that I had Ottangelo Grasso on, and he and I had a little contretemps about intelligent design. He's a supporter and I'm not. But today, I expect we'll have more agreement than disagreement because our guest, and I'm very pleased to announce this, is Steve McRae.
Well, hello, good afternoon, good evening in your neck of the woods.
Yeah. How the devil are you, Steve?
Oh, no, what time is it for you over there?
Evening. This is
Evening.
UK,
Yeah, for that.
8:30 UK evening.
Outstanding.
So how the devil are you?
I'm hanging in there, man. You know, just
Good.
making ends meet and trying to survive like the rest of society right now.
Yeah. We're all locked down. I haven't been out since 2019, it seems.
Yeah, this whole last year seems to have been a blur.
Yeah. Oh, you've got a green cup. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a couple of these cups. They happen to match my green screen perfectly, so it wasn't intentional. Just ended up that way.
I have the same problem with my beer bottles.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, the wonders of technology, eh? So, greetings to our viewers. I see we've got a small audience. That's obviously the cream that's floated to the top of the milk tonight, or this afternoon, wherever you are. And I just wanted to ask you, Steve, a bit about your background, because people are always interested in, our stories. So how did you get to be the Steve you are today?
Well, most of my background was in nuclear reactor operations in the Navy. Spent 6 years as a nuclear propulsion machinist, made first class in the Navy. Got out, went into retail. I actually was in retail prior to going to the Navy, but not for very long. But then I did about 20 years in retail. I worked at Circuit City as a service manager, operations manager for Big Lots, store manager for Radio Shack, assistant DM for a cell phone company. And then finally ended up at Kohl's for 6 or 7 years. And then basically quit my job, sold my house, moved to be closer to my daughter. And about the last 8 years or 7 years, been living off YouTube and just being a YouTuber the best I could possibly be. Right.
So you call yourself retired now, or just?
I'm not retired. I'm still working. It is work making videos and come up with topics, shows, and things of that nature.
Differently employed. Yeah,
I think that's a better way to put it. Yes, at least I'm working for myself now. I'm not working for somebody else per se. I have partners and I have people that I bring in to have shows with and co-host, but we usually do a lot more equal inputs on the things, and I'm not obligated to them; they're not obligated to me.
No, it's always better to work for yourself than to be a wage slave, isn't it?
If possible. It's not always the case that it's possible, right? So, I had jobs that I actually enjoyed. I had jobs I didn't enjoy, but if you are your own boss, you get to set your own hours, you get to decide your own workload. But I tell you, in the long run, it's not as much as if working a full-time job, but the stress is less for the most part.
Yes, yeah. You're probably richer to work for somebody else, but the benefits are in the other field, aren't they? The social field.
Absolutely.
Anyway, you're an atheist, I understand.
No, I'm an agnostic. We're going to have that discussion, and why I've got you here so I can get on record. You will be coming on my channel to have a discussion like that. You and Michael, if you want to bring him, preferably if you do, because you and I probably agree on more things than Michael and I agree with. But
which Michael is this?
What his last name is for the Atheist International Alliance. Sherlock, Michael Sherlock. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yes. Well, neither of us are part of Atheist Alliance International anymore because.
Oh, really? I thought you guys still with him.
No. He resigned. When was it? He resigned December, and I resigned in January.
So it hasn't been that long.
No. But I'm moving on to pastures new, which
nice.
I should be telling my audience about in due course. There will be a website to look at. Oh, I see I'm flashing. I might have to trim my green screen a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we're here because we met on some social media. I don't know whether it was Facebook or Twitter or wherever. And the trouble with social media is you get misunderstood, don't you?
Yeah, it's a lot of nuance lost in text.
Yes, yeah. There's an example of in the Twitter conversation we just had before we went live, because you were talking about partners, and I said partners, meaning, what would you do with them? And then you queried what I actually meant because it didn't come across.
Right.
And this is the problem with current social media. We've got to learn to use more emoticons or emojis or something to try and replace the lack of body language and intonation.
Yeah, the social cues don't exist if you don't have any form of conveyance of what your actual emotional states are going to be. I mean, people a lot of times will say things in jest, they'll be taken seriously, or they'll put things as sarcastic, and it doesn't come across as sarcastic, and so you have a little /s, or so there's a lot is lost in text form, especially when you're microblogging on Twitter, because you only got 280 characters.
Yes. So sarcasm and irony just don't really work, and neither do jokes.
Not very well.
A lot of the time, people don't get them. Anyway, what we encountered each other on was logic, because you're a big fan of logic. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love logic, but I think it's got limitations. And I'm an ex-science teacher, so I'm very much in favor of checking up on logic to determine whether the thoughts we've come up with are useful or not. And I've actually prepared a little slideshow, which, if you'll allow me, I'd like to share screen and talk through, and then I'll get your comments about it, if you'd be so kind.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so let me see if I can get this up. Where's it gone? Wait a minute,
I should say, while you're putting that up there's many forms of logic. There's obviously classical logic or propositional logic. There's predicate logic. There's pair-consistent logic. There's modal logic. There's a whole bunch of logics.
You've made it your thing, and I respect you for it, because
not really. I mean, logic to me is an entry level thing. I mean, I have a basal understanding of logic, first or maybe even second year stuff. But I think logical thinking is important. I think critical thinking is important, and I think that to be a rational person who has coherent thought processes and has the want to know things and at least believe things that are true rather than believe falsities, for the most part, I don't think it's always possible. Then it requires some kind of understanding of logic.
Yes, you can't be rational without logic.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but well, let me just show you the slideshow I've got in mind, and we'll see. If I go to play, that would be. Can you see that?
I can.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
It's all good. 5x5.
You can hear and see. Okay. Right. Let's go ahead then. Nobody would disagree with that, would they?
I'm fine with that. I mean, philosophy is thought. Philosophy is it's actually, I would put it more as the study of thought and study of rationality, reason, the study of reason, anything like that. Study of anything relating to thoughts and reasons is fine. Yeah.
Yep. And logic is the best sort of thought.
Sure.
And it's the one with the rules that excludes any irrational shilly-shally nonsense about supernatural or speculation or anything like that. It boils it down to its basics.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Logic doesn't discount supernatural. Logic would be more, you don't have a thought that's a contradiction, right? If I have a contradictory thought, then that would be irrational or logical. But if I believe God exists, that's not illogical, because God can exist by logic. I can believe that God can exist by logic. Whether it's a rational thought or not, it goes to justificatory conditions, and that's a completely different topic.
Yeah, Yeah. Okay, so it started way back with the ancient Greeks. Yeah, there were these guys.
Those guys.
Yeah, I've probably missed some names off, but that'll do for starters. And at that time, they only had their heads, really, as instruments to come up with outcomes. There were no serious telescopes. There were no microscopes. They were pretty much working with what you might call their God-given equipment.
Sure.
Have you?
Yeah, I mean, for a note, Aristotle actually denied a couple of the laws of logic. The only one he actually held to be infallible would be the law of identity, but he denied the law of excluded middle, and I think he did the law of non-contradiction as well. But I don't have a citation for that. I do remember explicitly that he didn't have the LEM.
Your microphone is dropping in and out a bit.
Is it?
Yeah. I don't know whether are you.
Should it be? Because I have a gain control and it's fixed, and I have a Focusrite, so it should. I got some friends out there on the outside. Let me ask Gullis, Scummer, or Chemo. You guys have any dropping out at all in the live chat? Maybe a little delay. But.
You know what's inside of this?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm doing a show.
Just look inside of this.
Well, I will tomorrow. Sorry. Off you go. You can take that with you. I can't look, I've got a man here I'm talking to.
This might be.
Yes, okay.
Hello.
I'll see you. Sorry. We got 4 minutes. Can you shut my door, please? We got some lovely kids here. I'm very lucky. Anyway, moving on.
I have one, and she's going on 16, but actually going on 35. The way she talks now.
Oh yeah. Tell me about that. Yeah, the girls always want to grow up very.
I don't know how they learn the things that they learn. I mean, I'm not even like being hyperbolic. It's like I didn't know half the stuff she knows about the world when I was 15.
Yeah. So it is a different world today. So they have access to all sorts of sources of information that I certainly didn't have. So moving on, then there came that sort of the next development was the Renaissance, when there was a whole lot more philosophers, a new bunch of philosophers, and they came up with the thought that intuition is unreliable. And they had a couple of examples. It's intuitive to think that a heavy stone should fall faster than a light one of the same dimensions, but that doesn't hold true. And also at that time, telescopes were invented, and it was discovered that the sun doesn't go around the earth, it's the other way around. And there was a load of guys who got into trouble with the church because the church didn't want its traditions to be changed. And that went on to such an extent that they invented a new branch of philosophy that they called natural philosophy, and we would call science. You okay with this?
Science is natural philosophy, yes.
Okay, good. Now, I hold that there are two realms. I'm a dualist, but not in the usual sense of materialism versus supernaturalism.
You're a property dualist, or you're not a substance dualist. You would be more of a property dualist. You have a mental property and then physical property.
Exactly. Yes,
Okay.
I think there is an abstract realm which goes on inside our heads, and there's a natural realm which goes on outside.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I by the way, I think that actually falls under. I don't know if that's a dualist or not. I mean, they call it property dualism, but I've read mixed things on property dualism, whether it's actually a dualism perspective, because it's only saying there's one thing that's physical, but out of that physical, you have a mental property of the physical, then you have the physical properties of the physical. So I don't know if that's actually dualism or not. Maybe
not.
Put in the comments section later. Now, substance dualism would be obviously, but
what's in a name anyway?
Philosophy is confusing to everybody.
Definitely. It's all about the meanings of words. So to carry on with that, my idea of a conceptual realm is that's where we think up stuff. That's where we make models, thought models, and we call the outcome of those thought models arguments or inferences. I know some people like to call them conclusions, but I'd rather reserve that word for the next stage.
Okay.
In my mind, as an ex-science teacher, I like to think that when we've finished conceptualizing, what we've got is a hypothesis or inference or argument, and that's something that needs testing for a match with the natural realm. And that's when we need to make
that's why we're going to differ a little bit, though.
Probably. That's where we need to make observations, and it's the coming together of the inference and the observation that generates a reasonable conclusion.
Yeah, that only works for empiricism, though. That only works for empirical things or scientific methodology. The realm of philosophy doesn't necessarily have empirical things you can test. Things are tested by argumentation, not by observation.
Well, granted. So in that respect, I would say it's all happening in the conceptual realm.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for an argument that if you and I wanted to discuss the validity and stuff like that, like the Kalam, it would be in the conceptual realm.
Yes. Okay. So there we go. These notes just underline what I've just said. That's my position. Okay.
Well, you can have conclusions without observations. I mean, obviously, you can conclude a argument from a rule of inference. If the premises are true and there's a valid logical structure, then the conclusion must follow by necessity. And you can say that the conclusion is true, and you don't have to have any observations. Nothing a posteriori. It can be a priori instead. Right?
There's a few syllogisms that allow that. The one, for example, which works out that if you tie two weights together, even if they're different, they will fall in as one lump. That's a syllogism that comes to an indisputable conclusion without any need for observing.
Well, I mean, I would have to actually hear the actual syllogism. Syllogisms would be two or more propositions that have a structure to it, right? So let's say you just take like modus ponens. If I have an if-then conditional implication, then I've got a statement, and then I have a conclusion from that statement, right? So you have to say the first premise, which would be the implication, is true or false, or the second premise, which is either P or not Q if you're going to do modus tollens. That premise is true, and then you have a conclusion that follows from that, right?
Yeah. I'm just saying that most syllogisms do not end up conclusively, and that's why I would rather save the word conclusion for the coming together of an inference and observation. So I don't know
what you mean by conclusion. Then I mean, if you have a logical syllogism that is valid and the premises are true and it's sound, the conclusion must follow. It must be the case. It's a necessity.
A conclusion, as used by science teachers, is the outcome of an investigation, not thought.
I think that's an odd distinction to be made. I mean, if you're going to say something is conclusion, logic is a pure form of deductive reasoning, right? So if you have a deductive argument that has a conclusion, the conclusion is something that necessarily follows from the premises with some valid rule of inference. I mean, I don't know what else you would call it. I don't know why there'd be a distinction there.
Well, I'm offering you inference as an outcome for a process which is carried on entirely with inside craniums, and conclusion for an outcome of an investigation where the end of conceptualizing, whatever we're going to call it, inference, I suggest, has been tested by looking for matching or non-matching observations in the natural realm. So that's what I want. That's how I want to define the words. I want to say what comes out of your head is not a conclusion in the scientific sense. You can call it an inference or whatever, but in order to get a conclusion, we have to take it further, go through an investigation, seek observations, and then we can say this hypothesis, inference, whatever you're going to call it, plus this observation enables us to draw this conclusion.
All right. Well, it sounds like scientism to me, but I'm going to go with it for an internal critique kind of thing, because you're just basically supporting empiricism and saying that you're going to say the word conclusion only comes from a scientific observation, from some kind of hypothesis testing.
It makes it clearer to distinguish.
I'm working with you here. I don't agree with it, but let's work with your thing here. Let's go with it.
Yeah. Okay. From my point of view, it makes it clearer to distinguish between the outcome of thought and the outcome of testing that thought.
Okay.
So there you go. The next few slides really hammer home this distinction, which I favor.
Okay, so how would you have, for a thought experiment, let's say a thought experiment that is not scientifically testable, what would you call that? Like, for example, let's take for example, we're talking about like infinite regress, right? And when you say, okay, one of the arguments against an infinite regress is the Grim Reaper paradox. Clearly, I cannot test the Grim Reaper paradox. First of all, you and I both probably agree there's no such thing as a Grim Reaper. And how would I scientifically go about trying to test something like the Grim Reaper paradox? It's a thought experiment, and so it's done in the conceptual realm.
Sure, it's in the conceptual realm, and it's not scientific. It cannot be tested. It's
it's not scientific. It's not supposed to be. These are philosophical claims, are not necessarily scientific claims.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're coming to the crux of the matter here. There's a limit to logic. So now let's consider whether the law of identity is a good model of reality. Okay. There's one representation of the law of identity. I can't remember whose version that is, but there's a number of other versions.
Leibniz, Kant, it basically Hume. I think even had one too. It's basically A equals A. Leibniz had I believe the first one to really break it down to just A equals A, or you can use a universal quantification of X equals X, or for all of X equals X. We want to use set builder notation, all the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and even Popeye came up with his own version of it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you're young enough to remember Popeye.
I'm not that much younger than you. I might be older. Who knows? I don't know.
No. So yeah, you're right. It's A equals A. It doesn't equal not A, right?
Well, no, I wouldn't. Okay, that's not the same thing. A equals A and A equals does not equal A are not the same thing. A equals A is law of identity. A does not equal not A is a non-contradiction.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's a different.
But so that's not. Well, they're not the same thing. A does not equal A.
Looking at the other end of the telescope, if you like.
A does not equal not A. Okay, I mean, we'll go with it.
Okay. So the question is, does this law match observations? Okay. Now, in the conceptual realm, we can conceive of anything.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, can you conceive of a square circle? Because I can't.
Well, I can, because if all you need to do is conceive of a third dimension, and then if you have a cylindrical rod and saw a bit off that's the same length as the width and look at it sideways, it's square.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing as a square circle. That is two perspectives from an object that has a light source that's different. I mean, we've all seen that image. That's not the same thing as a square circle at all. I mean, a square circle is an image that is conceptually, I think, impossible to even conceptualize. But I mean, if you say you can, I mean, I can't get in your head to epistemic limits, but I don't know anybody that really actually, I think, that can conceptualize a square circle.
I'm going to show you some images in a minute that you'll see that we can conceive, but they cannot be made. Anyway, so there's the Penrose fork.
Sure.
The Penrose triangle.
Klein bottle.
Yeah. Perpetual motion machines.
Over unity device, sure.
The oak tree. Now, of course, that's a real thing, which we can still conceive of. We can think of one right now. Mm-hmm. There's no limit we're not our imagination, our conceptualization ability is not limited by whether something is real or not. And of course, the jet engine used not to be real, until we imagined it and then made it and showed that it is real. So this is the wonder of the conceptual realm. Anything goes. And even Humpty Dumpty can be in there. Okay?
Okay.
We can even think of a supernatural realm. And here's some of those examples. There's an interesting one. That's the I forget the name of that picture now, but it's obviously not real. But that artist conceived of it.
Mm-hmm.
And here's your triangle, your staircase, your fork.
MC Escher.
Yeah, that's right. And Humpty. So these are all things that we can conceive of. And we can also conceive of timelessness in this realm. But the natural realm contains time. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And what is time? Well, it's the plotting of changes. And unfortunately, everything is perpetually changing. Nothing.
Well, that's one view of time. There's two kind of main views of time. There's what's called the Platonic realism, and the reductionist. And the one requires some kind of actual change, and the other one doesn't. Yeah.
Well, going from the point of view of a retired science teacher, this is the one that I favor.
Okay.
And this is the one that the evidence supports.
This would be a reductionist respect to time approach. It's called.
We've not found anything which isn't moving or deteriorating or ameliorating. We haven't found anything which doesn't change.
But if all motion cease to exist, and again, to conceptualize, we can actually have a concept of this. If all motion, Brownian, quantum, it doesn't matter. If all motion in the universe instantaneously cease to be moving in any way, no change whatsoever, any kinetic or potential energies or Hamiltonian or Lagrange, nothing. Does time still exist? If the entropy is not increasing, because the direction of time is generally, as you're well aware, is as the entropy of the universe goes up, right? But if there's no change in entropy, if there's no movement of any kind, there's no thermodynamical changes, then is there still time, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think my speculation on that subject would be valuable, because, as I said,
I'm just kidding. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just trying to get your schema. That's all.
I think that's an unscientific thought, because all of the observations we have made so far indicate that everything is perpetually changing, and the chances of finding a situation in which that is not the case is vanishingly improbable.
Oh, sure. No, it's purely a philosophical question.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So if you accept all these things, every A is relentlessly becoming not A.
Okay.
And we could talk about some examples. We could talk about radioactive decay. I mean, you've just mentioned a number of them. Brownian motion you mentioned. And we could talk about biological organisms that start as a zygote and develop and then subsequently deteriorate and die. It's all A relentlessly becoming not A.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So every A is on a conveyor belt of becoming not A. It's an ever-changing mixture of A and not A. So identity is actually mixed.
Yeah, this is where I think you jumped the shark, and pretty substantially. The reason being is when we're talking about the law of identity, A equals A, we're talking about properties, and properties are considered to be in a set. So we'll call that F. So you have F of X and you have F of Y. So those are two different sets of properties for two different objects, X and Y. Leibniz law, or the identity of indiscernibility, basically states that if you have two objects with the same exact property, they're the same object, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about the properties, and if you have an object that has the same properties of itself, it is itself. And even if you have something different at some other temporal time, It's not the same properties any longer because now you have a temporal difference. So now you're
Well-
comparing two different objects. It's no longer the law of identity. You have object one at some time that has some spatial temporal component. Then you have another object at a different spatial temporal component. They're not the same object. They're different properties.
You remember that the title of my slide presentation was, "Is the law of identity a good model of reality?"
Yes.
And it isn't.
There's no object you can think of. There's no object in reality that isn't not in itself. I don't even know what that would mean. If you have an object with the exact same properties at every single point of space and time, that object is itself. It can never be anything but its object at that point with those properties.
Now I've spotted the other part of disagreement here, because you mentioned that if you have an object at a single point of space and time,
those are properties,
and I contend that you can't have an object.
That would mean
you can't have an object at a single point of space and time. You can think about it, you can imagine, you can conceptualize.
Well, but even still, any properties, any property you give an object, right? Pick an object. Let's say, I have a sphere. Okay, what's some of the properties of that sphere? Well, it's round. It has a certain volume. It has a certain diameter or radius. It has a certain universal, if you want to go with particulars and colors and things of that nature.
Steve,
but it has some properties to it, right? Well, hang on. Work with me.
What you're doing is,
work with me real quick. So you have an object, right?
Yeah, I understand.
Hang on. Let me work with this for a second. You have an object. We'll call it the sphere.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that describes that sphere, everything that makes that sphere what it is, all the properties of that sphere, whether it has a temporal component, a physical component, a spatial component, a physical component, material component, anything that has to do with that sphere, it's always going to be itself. It's never going to have a property and a not a property. It can't be blue and not blue at the same time.
Okay,
does that make sense?
It makes sense if you accept that what you've done there is entirely been inside the conceptual realm.
I think it translates to the physical realm too, because you'd have to give me an example of an object that's not itself. In order to put forth your hypothesis, you have to say, okay, let me have an experiment where I can show an object that is not itself.
Okay, like I've just done that. I've talked about radioactive decay, because there is no element which is going to be the same tomorrow as it was today. And there is no moment.
Now you have two different objects, though. You have the object today and the object tomorrow. They're different properties. We're talking about the object right now. Whatever properties you have, you're talking about a single object. Now you're talking about two different objects, because you have the object A, which is at these properties. Now tomorrow, it's a different object with different properties, because now it's changed a whole bunch of factors. We're talking about a single object with a set of properties in F,
which you can only conceptualize, because
I don't know what that means.
Well,
you can only conceptualize.
Hang on. I listen to you. Listen.
Sure.
There is no moment when you can identify an object. Time is a continuous conveyor belt which does not stop. So we can imagine moments. We can say, let's pretend we can stop the conveyor belt and let's have a look at this object at that instant. And what you will find is you don't have a single identity. What you have is a mixture of what it used to be and what it's going to be.
That makes philosophically absolutely no sense to me, though. Because even if you have like a velocity, you can have an instantaneous velocity. So you have a continuous velocity of something. But at any point in time, I can say, what's the instant velocity of that kinematic function, right? So we can obviously do this, in a representative type of way in science. But again, you're just throwing this out there that, oh, look, in reality, we don't have these subdivisions of time. Like, granted, the smallest division of time, as you know, is Planck time. Which anything after that is indiscernible. They just can say that, look, anything below the resolution of Planck time is indiscernible and doesn't have any meaning to it per se, I guess the best way to put it, right? So if you want to have the smallest time slices that you can get to that has any kind of resolution to it would be Planck time. But even in the Planck time, even no matter what resolution you have, the properties are exactly the same as the properties. A must equal A, meaning that all the properties are exactly the same. You would have to find a condition where A, with this set of properties in F, do not match the properties of A in the exact same conditions. And that's, I think, what you're missing out on, because you're changing the conditions and saying, well, they're not equal. If the conditions are exactly the same, Serapis Paribus, all things being equal, then, and by the way, people could correct my Latin. I suck at Latin, by the way. But you're taking two different objects, and I think you're missing the point of that. I mean, have you looked into Leibniz law or like the identity of indiscernibilities?
Yeah, I have done a bit, but listen.
Okay, because they're axioms, right? They're axioms to show that if the properties of this set equals the property of this set, then the sets must be equal.
And as axioms, they are thought. And what we are investigating here is whether they are a reasonable model of reality.
Well, they're descriptions, right? I mean, A equals A is a descriptive thing. It's not prescriptive. The universe doesn't have to follow this, right? So even though it can be known a priori, I do hold a priori knowledge, and people may or may not. It's kind of irrelevant if they do or don't. But I mean, I think we can discover things a priori. But let's say we do look at something a posteriori, we observe it, and we say, okay, we're going to make this axiom for all things, for all of x equals x. We're going to describe that because this is what we observe, right?
So you're imagining a time when you can examine x and determine its properties. I'm saying there isn't that time, because while you're examining it, it's changing.
Yeah, so I think you're just putting too much into your. This is the problem I have with science people, and I love science. Don't get me wrong, but science people don't seem to understand philosophy very well. And
no, we understand it. It's thought.
I kind of disagree, because
we agree
because you're using a conceptualized thing to say, look, we can't take any individual time slices, therefore the properties can't be the same. Properties have no temporal component to it. These axioms, right, like Leibniz law, has there's no temporal component. Time's irrelevant. It's talking about the set, the property of the set,
and you can conceptualize
the properties of the elements in the set.
You can conceptualize those things. You can conceptualize axioms or concepts. But the question is, do they match observations? That's what I'm investigating here.
I'm still waiting for an object that's not itself.
Well, I can give you name an object. They're all changing. No object, even.
But you're adding a different component now. Hang on. What is changing with them?
Because change is inevitable.
No. What's the variable that's being changed? Give me a property that's being changed.
Well, take radioactive decay. At any moment, a lump of uranium is becoming lead.
Well, I disagree with that. Okay, look, when I have uranium, let's say I have uranium-235, okay? There's no information in that system. It's not becoming anything else. Matter of fact, one of the things in quantum mechanics prohibits what's called a local hidden variable. So those theories have been discounted because quantum is allowed for them. So there's nothing in that system for spontaneous fission to informational wise that we are just unaware of to happen. What happens is it just happens. Spontaneous fission occurs, and then it can decay into some kind of fission.
We're not looking at the causality.
Or decay fragment, I guess, would be the case.
We're not looking at the causality of it here. We're looking at the fact that it's changing. That's all.
What's changing? But what does it change? It's not changing into lead. It's not doing anything. It doesn't. It's not a You have this weird thing as this process. It's not a process.
But it is. I mean, how was your?
Listen, in order to have a process, you must have a temporal component or causations.
Don't interrupt me.
Sorry.
Would your nuclear fission submarine machines, your engines, have worked if uranium wasn't changing into lead?
For a surface, it works when you have. And it's not because it's changing into lead; it's because you have a new. And then it undergoes fission. But I understand what you're saying. But that's fine. I'm not going to get into the neutron life cycle and K effective right now. That's some technical stuff. But I know I get what you're saying because the atom can split.
Okay, but the point remains: there's change. There's nothing that doesn't change. I mean, gold is probably the most stable of the elements. But it's changing slowly.
Well, iron is the most stable, but
I think iron's too reactive to be very stable. But anyway, the point is.
But what's the property that's changing? Give me the property, the name of the property.
Well, in the case of uranium, It's the property is the chemical nature of it.
That's not a property. That's just a
How can that not be a property? How can that not?
I mean, you'd have to give me the property would be something along the lines like, even if you have an emergent property, like let's say water, the emergent property of water is it's a wetting agent, right? It's not it's wet.
Yes.
Believe it or not, water's not actually wet, but it's a wetting agent.
Yes,
right?
yes,
yeah.
yes.
And so it's an emergent property. Why is water a wetting agent? Because it's an emergent property of the hydrogen bonds in the liquid itself, right? You have one hydrogen atom, you don't have any emergence of hydrogen bonds between other molecules. You certainly don't have any wetting agent. So even an emergent thing, that's still a property, right? So I don't know what you mean by the chemical things changing. There's nothing changing in a uranium nucleus except for obviously you have the quantum fluctuations, you have your quarks and like that. But I mean,
you're losing
what's that?
You're losing neutrons.
Well, I mean, if that undergoes beta decay,
is losing neutrons. There is not.
That's not. It's not undergoing that.
You challenged me to give you an example of something that's changing, or what did you call them?
Property that's changing.
A property that's changing. Well, I should be doing the challenging here. I should be challenging you to give me an example of something that's not changing. Good luck.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I agree with you. Everything's changing because even if you have a spatial temporal location for uranium atom, it's still, we're moving around the sun, right? Sun's moving around the galaxy moving around the local cluster. There's change everywhere. Everything changes. I have no problem with change. But I think your conceptual error is that you think that because there's change and you cannot have any discrete time slices, because time could be what's called contiguous, or it can be discrete.
Yeah, we're all agreeing on that.
You're trying to isolate these time slices and say, okay, at any moment that you have a time slice, there is undergoing a change. Therefore, it cannot be the law of identity, and that makes absolutely no sense because whatever properties you have for that time slice, those properties are going to be the same of the object. The object is the object. It's called an instantiation. If I have A equals A, whatever I instantiate A with as an identity, the relationship holds the same, right? So pick anything you want, any set of properties. Right, even if I was to grant you change as a property, right? Whatever I'm putting in that set of elements for the properties for the f of x, that is going to be equal to itself always and forever. There's no possible way it cannot be that way. And I think that's where our disagreement is.
So, are you going to give me an example of something that's retaining its properties for any?
Well, as long as there's motion. As long as there's a difference in the universe, everything's undergoing a change.
Yes, and you can't get away from that. There is no location anywhere which is static and unchanging. You
also got a quantum field that's everywhere too.
Yeah, indeed. But you're going to be arguing with me on a conceptual level again, and my contention is that the law of identity or the law of non-contradiction, whichever one you're going to point to, my contention is simply that it's not a good model of reality.
Well, because the law of non-contradiction is that a proposition cannot be true and false at the same time, right? That's law of non-contradiction.
Yeah, which is fine conceptually, but in the natural realm, everything is constantly changing into something which is not itself.
I mean, I'm fine with getting rid of law of non-contradiction and LEM because there's different logics that have those. They're called paraconsistent logics. There's what's called, if I remember correctly, truth gluts and goots, and there's different types of logic that doesn't allow for certain things like logical middle, like multi-value logics would have 3 values: true, false, and unknown, right? Okay. But that's fine. I mean, again, these are axioms only for classical logic.
Yeah. We're not discussing the other ones. We're just discussing whether the law of identity is a reasonable representation, a good model of reality. And it's not. It's inconsistent because reality has time, and the law of identity doesn't permit that.
But time is, if you have a time for a property of something, that time is going to be itself. You can never have time and not time. You can have some spatial temporal location that has some value or property of the time that's not that time. It doesn't work for any instantaneous thing.
You can think that. I can think that. it's a useful thought. It enables us to make rational conclusions or inferences, but it ain't like reality.
I still don't have a single clue how you conceptualize, but I don't see how you can think that in reality something can be not itself. I mean, it seems really incoherent to me.
It's because whatever, if you want it to be the same as itself, which is the law of identity, there is no sameness. There's only constant change.
Again, you're dealing with a set of properties, right? I mean, do you agree? Do you agree with Leibniz law that if you have two objects with the exact same property, that they're the same object? Conceptually, yes. Okay, but find two objects. All right. So what would that mean then? If you have f of x and f of y, we have two sets of properties, right? Two sets, and they have the exact same conditions, same exact elements, and how would they be what is the distinguishing thing between them that makes them not the same thing? Well, there isn't any. Reality or otherwise.
Conceptually, no. Excuse me. There isn't anything between them. But we can conceptualize lots of things that don't actually exist. I mean, there are no real circles. They're all conceptual.
No, I tend to agree with that. I don't think there's real. I think they're all an archetype, and thought that a pure circle that conceptual. Do I think circles and triangles exist? No, but I get a lot of crap for that. But I have to be.
Exactly.
I'm not. Yes, but I agree with you.
We're agreeing on that.
I'm also a realist too.
yeah, I think I would be on your side with that too. But the point is, whilst you can conceptualize these things, and whilst it's useful to be able to conceptualize them, and it enables us to work ahead and make further reasonable assumptions, in a universe that is quantized, they can't exist. You can only join the dots. And that doesn't give you a perfect circle.
Sure. Yeah. No. Look. I'm on board with that. I don't think there's such things as perfect triangles, perfect squares. I tend to color realism. I even have a thing for mereological nihilism. I don't think there's anything as really as an object per se. I think it's conceptualized, as you put it. I think it's convenient. But if you tend to mereological nihilism, it alleviates a lot of problems. It's just a rearrangement of primitives, right?
So back in the 16th century, and subsequent centuries too, because it bubbled on a bit, the philosophers realized that thought is just thought. You can't actually do anything with it. You've got to try and see whether it matches observations. And that's when they came up with the idea of science.
Well, we don't know if thought can do anything. That's a whole problem of philosophy of mind with the mind-body problem, where the thought can actually do something physical or not. But that's a different topic. But go ahead.
Well, there you go. That's me finished, really. I could stop my screen sharing now.
That's fine. Yeah, like I said, I think we have a fundamental disagreement there, because I do think the law of identity does correspond to reality. I do think that there's no instance of anything in reality that it isn't of itself, even if things do change. I think the entire thing is incoherent to say otherwise. As a matter of fact, as far as I know, I don't know any philosopher that discounted the law of identity. There's other ones they did. I mean, like I said, the law, the other logical law. There's a whole bunch of logical rules, by the way. It's more than just 3 laws of logic. Those are just most common, but
you can't discount it in the head, because it's a concept, and like a circle or a triangle, it's a very useful concept. But where I'm challenging it is whether it matches observations in the natural realm.
Well, to date, I've never seen an object that's not self.
Let's take a look at some of our.
Is there? I'm not following the Facebook. I'm only following the YouTube channel. So there's questions. I have not seen them. So my apologies.
We don't get all the questions because some of them come up on. I get the YouTube ones here, not all the Facebook ones for some reason. So we've got Samuel Falzoni says hello. That's nice. Hello to you,
hey,
Samuel. Thank you for watching.
By the way, you can tell my voice is a little bit shot, can't you?
Me too. Yeah. Have another slurp of your coffee. I'm in halfway down.
I love this coffee. This is good stuff.
even if it is invisible.
Yes. No, there's real coffee in there.
So he who watches the clock will never be more than one of the hands. Some guy, yes. Some guy made a lot of good sayings. Sounds okay. I don't know what Chemo was referring to there, but thanks for watching, Chemo.
Hey, Chemo.
Godless Scummer. Volume is, yes, volume. That was your
earlier on. Thanks.
It stopped. Early on, you were fading in and out. It was as if you were going off and on your microphone, but it stopped. So that problem's gone away. Nothing too bad yet. Oh, here we've got a little bit of Latin. My Latin's very rusty. Yeah, he's
res ipsa loquor versus prima facie.
Yeah, he's talking about the difference between the conceptual realm and the natural realm. Yeah, rough translation. Jamie, hi to you. Thanks for watching. Yes, Popeye. Yes, it was his song, wasn't it? I am what I am.
I am what I am.
Yeah,
that's all I am.
Yeah. And the skeptic is saying good evening. So I don't know whether they've got any questions to ask us, but I'll put my banner up so that if they want to specify a question, perhaps they'd like to put a Q in front of it so we can distinguish it from the comments.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Throw a question at us and see if we can deal with it. We are coming towards the end of our hour, because I don't like to put my victims through too much torture.
Yeah, and we can always like do a part 2 after we get some comments and people getting to digest this. And there's a couple people I want to run it by as well.
Yeah.
I tagged Mark Pellegrino on it too, because he is I don't know if you know much about objectivism and Ayn Rand, but she kind of formulated her entire objectivism on the principle of love identity. Now I got some major issues with Randians, but a lot of it does stem from the love identity. So I had tagged him on it, and he might check it out, because I'm like, hey, here's a guy that's saying, hey, your fundamental core, your fundamental axiom is flawed from the beginning. So
exactly, yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, you see, where I'm coming from, I'm trying to make the point that logic is great stuff. When we don't have any observations, when we genuinely don't know, we've only got logic as a tool to investigate and discover. And that's what happened up until the Renaissance. People were using logic because there wasn't anything else. But then the Renaissance opened doors of telescopy and microscopy and all sorts of other instrumentations, which showed us that our intuition, even our logical deductions or inferences or inductions or abductions, need not be true. And the only way to distinguish your Humpty Dumptys from your jet engines is to investigate.
There actually is a form of logic called intuitionist logic, and it hasn't been making a resurgence lately. There are some very good reasons to have an intuitionist logic.
Yeah, it's useful, but only as the end of conceptualizing and the beginning of investigating. Until you've done your investigating. I mean, take, for example, the law of relativity came out in, when was it?
2000. General was in 2000.
No, 19.
Around 8 and special was like 2000. No, yeah, special was first in 2005, 2003, and 2000. I'm sorry, 1913.
19. Yes.
19. So I think it was 1905, 1908, 1913. If I remember.
Yeah, exactly. But it wasn't accepted until, what was his name? Pennington went to, was it the Azores, an island near the equator, and observed the bending of light around the sun.
Occultation of the star.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that, I wanted to show that, and I wanted to stop this. So
yeah, that was considered to be the final observation to test the validity. There's different ways to verify certain things, and
subsequently, there's been lots of other ways of verifying it, and it has stood up so that we now accept it as highly probable. We can't prove it, because there's always a possibility that tomorrow another observation will come in which will challenge it.
Yeah, scientific models are never proven, and they shouldn't be provable for that very reason.
Exactly. There's nothing certain, but What I'm saying is that logic is some way back in that process and is even less certain, because it's just the end of hypothesizing, and that's when investigation starts. So what I don't like is philosophers being dogmatic.
See, I think the logic is the most purest form of certainty. I think if anything that has to do with certainty, it's from the logical domain. Now, granted, I'm not talking about Cartesian certainty. When we talk about certainty, I'm going to frame it at relative certainty, as meaning within the confines of the system, right? Descartes obviously had a very different way of looking at things. He thought knowledge required certainty, and he thought, of course, how do you determine whether you have some demon talking to your ear? And I understand those things, but I think for most people's discourse, when we say certainty, we mean in the confines of a system. Because if I say, like, look, you got two entangled particles, I know one spin up, I automatically know the other one spin down with 100% certainty, right? In the confines of that system. I think that's most people have understood the terminology that way. Would you agree?
I loved your idea of relative certainty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because again, people in philosophy love to talk about Descartes certainty, and true epistemic certainty or something. I don't. But to me, it's just epistemic certainty is what I go by.
But what the theists get into, what we have to combat when we're talking to them, is absolute certainty.
Yeah. Well, they throw a lot of words. I mean, you got two types of theists that I've noticed. You have the ones that actually do a lot of research and reading, and they know all the Christian studies, and they know the Bible, and they also know, like Thomas and Aquinas, and they also know the logic, and they do a very good job on it. Then you have the other ones who are just, bottom of the barrel, same as a flat earther, young earth creationist. They're just nonsense kind of people, and you have to differentiate between the caliber of the person you're having a discussion with, right? So, I mean, I would agree with you. There's a lot of nonsensical theists out there that just aren't worth people's time. There's also a lot of nonsensical atheists out there that I just think to myself, man, you're in the same. They literally are saying some of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my life, thinking it's somehow.
I know.
And I'm not talking about your argument, by the way. I'm talking about things that are way worse than this.
Yeah. And the trouble with the internet is it's put us into contact with all these people.
Yeah. Yes, it does. And they always think, and when you tell somebody, look, I really don't have the time or the patience to dive into your particular bizarre mindset. I found this one interesting. This is why I wanted to have this discussion, or you wanted to have it with me. But there's some other things that are just so bizarre. I'm like, I don't even have the wherewithal. And then they're like, oh, you're just running away because you can't disprove me. I'm like, okay, you go with that.
Was this a deep dive into Thomson's lamp sort of query? Well, that means nothing to me.
No, but it's so funny that it's funny that he mentioned that, because I had and I don't know if this was because I had mentioned something on Twitter. I had asked just recently, this morning, if people wanted me to show how to prove a divergent series, 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 = 5 = -1, 12R, and that is based upon what's called analytical continuation. And so the other things called telescopic series, alternations, and the Thomson lamp is actually it's a philosophical problem dealing with on off as a telescopic sun. I think they call it a Grandi series. There's a Cicero series. There's a Mamaginian summation. I hate pronouncing these guys' names. I butcher them all. I can understand the math, but never understand how to pronounce them. But that's what the Thomson lamp is.
So Mark Stanbury here says the idea that there was only logic until the Renaissance and no evidence is daft. Well, I don't think I said there was only logic until the Renaissance. In fact, I went back to the ancient Greeks. You said it was intuition. Well, I said that they didn't have instruments to observe with. They only had their own equipment, God-given stuff. What about Eratosthenes' measurement of the circumference of the Earth? Yeah, that was great. Sure. No, we know that a small cadre of people knew that the Earth was round in Egypt, but nowhere else. What about primitive tribal beliefs being based on observation? Sure. And early beliefs based on observation, using human eyes, nothing better, seem to indicate that the sun went around the Earth. It's very reasonable. It comes up one side, goes across the top, and goes down the other side. It must go underneath, mustn't it? All logical deduction other than pure abstract logic a la Russell comes from an initial experience, and that experience is a priori, albeit anecdotal, evidence as a spark to start deducting from. Well, no, there are some, I would say there are some logical processes which don't begin with evidence, it just begin with an idea.
Yeah, I think he meant evidence rather than experience. Because I don't know what it would be to have experience a priori, right? Because experience, we're talking about experience, that's a posteriori.
Yeah.
A priori doesn't require experience.
Yeah,
You can learn, you can gain information, but
you could
I
have
don't know what
a dream.
experiential a priori means.
You could have a dream that you're experiencing something in the future. Anyway, we've come up to the end of our hour. So
that was quick. That was fast.
Yeah, well, it goes, doesn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to tell people that next week my guest will be Zachary Ardern. He's a doctor of biochemistry or microbiology, something in that field, and yet having climbed up the academic scientific ladder that far, he's a creationist or intelligent
young
designer.
earth creationist.
I'm not sure quite what he is. He might be an intelligent designer, but I've debated him twice already in the flesh. I debated him in New Zealand a few years ago and here in our local town in England a couple of years back. So I'm meeting him again in Ask an Atheist next week, same time, same place. Please come and watch and ask questions and comments. Steve, thank you very much. You have been
as well. I really appreciate it, man. And if I get shout out something I'm going to be doing, I have a very special thing coming up too, actually.
Yeah.
I'm going to be on the 14th. I'm going to be with Dr. Fuzz Rana, who I do a show with called Agree to Argue. He's a biochemist creationist, but an old earth creationist with some modifications. And Dr. Hugh Ross, which is an astrophysicist, and also one of my heroes that I grew up with reading his books, Dr. Paul Davies, if you're familiar with that. So I have a show with all three of them on the 14th, which is going to be just a dream team, Yeah. Talk about fine-tuning argument.
Oh, about what?
The fine-tuning argument.
Oh, right. Yes, indeed. I've had a go at that too myself. So the other thing I wanted to say is that just before this program was scheduled, Global Atheist News went out. And that's another show that I do every Saturday. It's 8 o'clock on UK time. And what would that be where you are? 12 noon?
12. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And on the East Coast, it would be 3 in the afternoon, something like that. Mm-hmm. And all time zones in between. So Global Atheist News is selected news concerning how religion impacts humanity. Give it a look. I can put the link to my archive in the details underneath this show. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and thank you, Steve, for appearing.
And thank you for inviting me.
Bye-bye.